We're testing the Bokeh, the Cicada, the FD, and 27 other fairway drivers to see if we can find which one is the straightest. But what's the straightest disc in your bag? Is it a mid-range? Maybe a putter? I'm willing to bet for most people it's anything but a driver. And that's because drivers fly fast and they fly far. And the farther they fly and the faster they go, the more that they're going to move left to right. And the harder it is for them to stay straight. So what is the straightest fairway driver? And what is straight anyways? Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. This is Flight Numbers Don't Matter, where we test and compare discs against each other to see how they really compare. But like I said a moment ago, what is straight anyways? Well, in the world of putters, it looks like this. A literal straight line. Some straight mid-ranges can accomplish the same thing, like this Claymore here from a video we made a couple years ago. But drivers? Well, they struggle to accomplish the same. Even in our previous straight fairway comparisons, we often still see quite a bit of movement left to right. So let me be clear, that is totally fine. Drivers are gonna move left and right. So the idea behind trying to find the straightest one is to find the one that moves the least left and right. Sometimes that looks like this. And other times it's more like this. Straight fairway drivers excel on courses like this. They're often wooded, and they demand specific shots to hit specific gaps. And conveniently or inconveniently, a lot of courses cut sort of straight lines through the woods, requiring you to hit gap after gap after gap, or suffer a huge kick into the woods. So today we'll be trying to find some straight fairway drivers with the help of Team Six Sided Discs' Josh Alexander. Josh plays in MA1, and he's got quite a bit of power, so we'll be trying to interpret the results based on his power level. Josh will be throwing all of the fairway drivers in this field here, and to help us visualize our fairway, we're aiming for the infield dirt that you see here. We're trying to hit sort of an imaginary gap and then keep the disc inside those lines for as long as possible. The longer we can keep a disc in those lines, the longer it would avoid tree kicks on an actual wooded fairway. So let's see how these 30 or so drivers compare. And we'll dive right into one of the most popular straight fairway drivers on the market, the Axiom Crave. Rated at 6.5 speed, 5 glide, -1 turn and 1 fade, the Crave sounds like it should be very straight. And we have two different Craves to look at today. One is an MVP's stock Neutron plastic, and the other is a recent special edition release in Total Eclipse. The Neutron isn't exactly a domey disc, but the Total Eclipse Glow plastic feels much flatter than the Neutron. So, how do they fly? Well, the Neutron Crave flies great. It misses our imaginary gap slightly, but it does this really smooth hyzer flip that gets up to flat, holds there for quite a while, and then gently fades back. And this is a great example of what a straight fairway driver can mean. You often won't get it to hold straight for the entire flight, but it's all about how long can it hold straight and keep it on the line that you need it to stay on. The Total Eclipse Crave, on the other hand, was not straight at all. Keep in mind that Josh can throw well over 400 feet, and this iteration of the Crave is this overstable. Jeez. So if you can throw over 600 feet and you need a straighter Crave, maybe this one's for you. And then to give us an approximate visual representation of how these discs compare against each other, we'll be plotting them on this graph chart thing here, which would put our Neutron Crave right around here for stability and distance, while the Total Eclipse Crave is way over here since it was so much more overstable. Next, let's see another Axiom disc, the Prism Neutron Trance. In the MVP plastic world, Prism refers to the sparkly translucent rim here, while the Neutron plastic is in the core. Though this is swirlier than our Neutron Crave from a moment ago, it is still the same stock opaque premium plastic. The Trance though is interesting because I bought this one for myself, hoping it would be a straight to understable fairway. But from the moment I threw it, I knew it was not that, at least not for my arm. For Josh though, maybe it'll be a little bit straighter. Or maybe it'll be noticeably more overstable than the Neutron Crave, with a much more pronounced late fade. That being said, it did hit the gap, and it stayed in our imaginary fairway here for a decent amount of its flight, which puts it here on our chart, in between our two Craves. Next, let's take a look at one of the best-selling straight fairway drivers, the Latitude 64 River. The River is very popular amongst newer players, partly for its eye-catching flight numbers of 7 speed, 7 glide, -1 turn, and 1 fade, but also for reasons we'll see in just a moment. Compared to the MVP drivers we started with, it is much more domey. And for Josh's arm, that is all a recipe for much more understability than we've seen so far. It flips up from a slight hyzer, starts drifting, and then just keeps on moving right for the entire flight. And that is exactly why it's more popular amongst newer players. Next up is a similarly rated driver from Gateway, the Sabre. At 7.6, -1.1, the Sabre also has flight numbers that should appeal to just about anyone. But as always, flight numbers don't matter, because while the River was moderately understable today, the Sabre was the exact opposite. The Sabre starts out hitting that imaginary gap nicely, and then it holds straight for a moment before it finds a similar late fade that the Axiom Trance had, which lands it basically in the same spot as the Trance on our chart. And we'll switch things up by jumping back to MVP for another disc, the Drift. From another one of MVP's family of brands, the Streamline Drift is rated at 7.5, -2.1. And for whatever reason, it's not the most popular fairway driver in the MVP family. Maybe that's because it doesn't have a super cool, colorful, or gyro-infused rim, but apparently it's now the most underrated driver in the MVP lineup, because this is what it did when Josh let it rip. A slight hyzer release, gentle flip up, gets on just a slight turn, and just gently holds that for one of the straightest flights we've seen so far. Did you know that Streamline discs usually cost anywhere from $3 to $6 less than MVP or Axiom? Anyways, let's shift gears now to a few drivers from Innova, all flirting with straight flight numbers, beginning with the Hawkeye. The Hawkeye is one of the most recent additions to Innova's Fairway lineup, arriving around the time Innova reintroduced many of the old Discmania molds. And Innova has a pretty crowded lineup, so that means that the Hawkeye shares very similar flight numbers to a whole bunch of different discs, such as the Innova TL, among several others. Today, though, the Hawkeye was by no means the straightest disc we tested. On one throw, it caught some air and flew nearly 400 feet for probably the farthest throw of the day. While on another, it flipped up from a slight hyzer and drifted through our imaginary gap, but kept on drifting for a pretty understable flight. And this is probably a good time for me to pause and remind you how we do these big comparisons. Flight numbers don't matter. Comparisons typically involve 20 or more discs, sometimes as many as 40, and that means a whole lot of throwing. Which is why Josh and I will set up in a spot for a few hours, throw every disc several times until we feel like we understand it and have a good visual representation of how it flies. But of course, it's not just how it flies, it's how it flew for us today in these conditions. And only once we feel like we have that represented do we mark it off our list and then move on to the other discs until we're done. But again, I emphasize how it flew for us. That does not necessarily mean that's how it will fly for you. It is at least showing us representatively how these specific discs compared to each other today. So keep all that in mind as we check out our next driver, the Savant. Our first 9-speed of the day, the Savant is rated at 9.5, -1.2. And while the Hawkeye is one of the new ones, the Savant was introduced back in 2014, and it's probably lagged in popularity because of how close its flight numbers are to the hugely popular Innova Thunderbird. But there are definitely a handful of players that throw it, and I think we figured out why. Because it can do this. Imaginary gap hit? Check. Holding straight for most of its flight? Check. Late but reliable fade? Check. And to be honest, that's much better than I expected from the Savant. And it earns it a place right here on our board. As I mentioned earlier, Innova has a ton of different discs and a whole bunch that even fit just in this straight fairway slot. So we narrowed our choices down to just 3, which leaves us with our last one, the Leopard 3. While the Savant was rated slightly overstable and the Hawkeye rated straight, the Leopard 3 is on the slightly understable side. And one thing I'm sort of expecting here is for the plastic to be a big factor, because this is the Duo Leopard 3, which is a blend of 2 different plastics together. And so far what I've heard online is that the Duo plastic can be on the little more overstable side. I guess we'll see. Considering the Leopard 3 has -2 turn and 1 fade, it shows us Basically exactly that. It gets quite a bit of turn, but does fight out late on for excellent distance. Probably more turn than we're looking for straight, quote unquote. But for someone with a little less power than Josh, this Duo Leopard 3 would be a lot straighter. Today, though, it's going to land right here. Next, let's see a couple potentially straight fairway drivers from Mint discs. The Diamondback and the Grackle. Rated at 9.5, -2.2, and 7.5, -1.2 respectively, Texas's own Mint Discs has a couple other fairway drivers that could potentially find themselves in this same video, the Jackalope and the Salamander, though both of those have often been quite understable for us. However, the Grackle and the Diamondback seem the most likely to fit this straight slot, or so I thought. The Diamondback didn't have quite as much turn as I expected, but had a lot more fade than I expected. While the Grackle holds straight, only briefly, before a pretty aggressive fade as well. That's going to land both of them right around here, not far off the Savant or Trance. Next up is a fairway driver I used to bag myself, the Prodigy F5. With the same flight numbers as the Leopard 3, it's not too surprising to see the F5 turn. But it's maybe a bit surprising to see it turn so much. One of the most understable so far, the F5 goes right here. While the F5 just about met expectations, our next disc did not. This is the Clash disc's Cinnamon, rated at 9.5, -1.52. And look, flight numbers are made up, and every company makes them up differently. Sometimes you just give a disc flight numbers that people have seen before, or sometimes you maybe take more time to be more precise. So if you give a disc -1.5 turn, not -1, not -2, but -1.5, it feels like you took the time to test that and find a very specific amount of understability for that disc. So why then does the Cinnamon do this? Because that looks exactly like 0 turn, or more specifically, not -1.5, or not even close. Anyways, I don't know why I'm so worked up about it. Flight numbers. Rant over. Thanks for listening. The Cinnamon goes here. Let's move on. Not just to a newer disc, but also an entirely newer brand, Climo discs, and to their new fairway driver, the Streak. Rated at 7.501, the Streak fits in a sort of in-between spot in terms of flight numbers. Sometimes 0.1 means a pretty straight disc, but other times 0.1 means a more T-bird style, reliably slightly overstable fairway driver. So what does one fade mean for the Streak? Well, it means if you throw the Streak on hyzer, it will immediately fade out aggressively. While if you throw it hard and flat, it does hit our imaginary gap, but it also still has a pretty aggressive late fade. So in this signature plastic, it's definitely on the more overstable side, putting it right around here. And that means we're right around the halfway mark. And to be honest, the best is yet to come. Or at least it better be, because we haven't had that many straight flights yet. Let's kick off the back half with a newer fairway driver, an unexpected collaboration between Foundation Disc Golf and Gateway. This is the Cornerstone. Here in NXT G plastic, it's made by Gateway for Foundation. It's rated at 9.5, -2.2, and it does feel really good in the hand. I really like the feel of the plastic. Regardless of how it feels though, ultimately all that matters is what does it do on the course? Because -2.2 sounds straight. But is it? Well, here's the thing. I threw the Cornerstone recently and it was super overstable for my arm. But Josh isn't me, and if you have power, it's a whole different disc. Josh gets it to flip up from a slight hyzer before it drifts along our imaginary fairway and finishing with just a subtle forward fade. And that's honestly a lot straighter than I expected it to be. So for Josh's arm speed, it lands right around here on our board, but buyer beware, because if you don't have MA1 or MPO power, it's probably not going to be quite as straight for you. Next, let's dive into 3 more contenders from the Trilogy brands, starting with the Contender. A new prototype released at Disc South earlier this year, the Contender is rated at 9.5, -1.1, and it comes in a sparkly lucid plastic blend that's pretty domey. And all of that is a recipe for a very similar flight to the Cornerstone, as it flips up smoothly and gently drifts right for its entire flight. It definitely lacks that late fight out that the Cornerstone had, but there's one other important difference. To get the Cornerstone to fly straight-ish, Josh had to throw it really hard, while the Contender is the exact opposite. He had to back off on the power to get this slow drift. And that's a perfect example of why flight numbers don't matter. The Contender earns a spot here, definitely more understable than the Cornerstone. Our next Trilogy disc is a brand new entry in the Royal line, the Mighty. Rated at 7.5, -1.2, the Mighty is giving me flashbacks to another newer Fairway driver in the Royal line, the Brave. Probably because the Brave that we tested was also a swirly purple. But the reason that the Brave comes to mind is not necessarily a good one. The Brave, confusingly rated with basically the same flight numbers as the Mighty, was in fact surprisingly understable for Caleb and I when we tested it back in 2024. So consider me a touch skeptical of the Mighty before we start. Josh lets a rip and in fact grip locks it high and right, but despite the extra power that comes with a grip lock, the Mighty gets just a tiny bit of turn before it fights out. And today the Mighty was a tough cookie to crack, because frankly we ran out of time before we got a decent shot with it. So I'm not going to add it to our board, but it does bring us back to how we conduct these tests. You know, even though we're spending hours on the course, sometimes there are discs that just don't make the cut. So while we ended up with about 30 discs in this test, we started with like over 35. But that just means we can include those discs in a future video. One disc that did make it into the video today is our last Trilogy disc, the Escape. Rated at 9.5, -1.2, the same flight numbers as the Savant we saw earlier, this Escape turned out to be much straighter than the Savant. It gets just a subtle turn before fading forward for a pretty straight shot. But again, buyer beware, because we've tested Escapes in different plastics in the past, and they've been everywhere from slightly overstable to outrageously understable, depending on the plastic. With Trilogy behind us, we have just 3 brands left, but it's the heavy hitters, because we have 8 discs from Discraft, 2 from Discmania, and 2 Axiom Bokehs. So let's kick off the home stretch with our first Discraft mold, the Sagara. The Sagara is just an overstable version of the Cicada, which we'll see in a moment. And we have it today in Z plastic, as well as the 2026 Tour Series version, which is a mix of Discraft's titanium and Big Z plastics. The Sagara is rated at 7.6, -1.2. And as is often the case, it's a tale of 2 plastics with 2 very different flight characteristics. The stock Z Sagara, thrown flat, was happy to slowly turn while pushing forward, while the Tour Series edition was much more overstable on every throw. That puts them here and here respectively. Another popular straight fairway driver in the Discraft lineup is the Passion. Rated at 8.5, -1.1, the Passion is a signature mold for Paige Pierce and is often available in lighter weights. This one, though, is max weight, and it probably flies straight for someone, but just not for Josh today. Because while it does hold straight for just a moment, it also has this really aggressive sweeping fade, and that lands it left of our imaginary fairway and left of most of the competition on our chart. Can one of Discraft's classics do any better? This is the Undertaker, rated at 9.5, -1.2, and it, again, shares flight numbers with several discs we've already tested today, like the Escape and Savant. Unfortunately for Undertaker fans out there, this Big Z Undertaker was more Savant than Escape, turning for a split second before showing a lot more overstability. That's not straight. It lands here on our chart. So next, let's move on to my wife's most favorite mold in the entire world, the Mantis, which also shares its name with her least favorite bug in the entire world, a praying mantis. The Mantis is probably the oldest and least popular of the Discraft discs we're looking at today, and it's rated at 8.4, -2.2. It's typically quite domey and usually known for having probably more than -2 turn. But today, this Mantis caught both Josh and I by surprise, because it flips up from a slight hyzer, hits our imaginary gap, smoothly drifts before it gently fades, and that, my friends, qualifies as straight in the world of fairway drivers. It earns a spot right around here, just a touch right of the straightest discs we've seen today. Our last 3 Discraft discs are the 1 and 1 and one and only Cicada. An instant hit with Discraft fans, its eye-catching flight numbers of 76, -11 look like exactly what all of us want in our bag. But all flight numbers do is set your expectations for how a disc will fly. And well, there's only one thing in life that determines whether you feel good or bad about the outcome of a situation, and that is your expectations. So in the case of the Cicada, I think the expectations have set us up for failure. Because we have this Big Z Cicada, and it gets a massive turn. And we have this ESP Cicada, which burns over super quickly. And then we have this Tour Series Cicada, and some of the Tour Series we saw earlier were pretty beefy, so maybe this one will be more -11. Or maybe it's a full-on roller. Now I want to clarify, this is not necessarily all bad news. The Sagara flew straighter for Josh because Josh throws really hard. And therefore the Cicada didn't fly very straight because Josh throws very hard. But if you don't throw very hard, the Cicada probably flies a lot straighter for you. So if you're an MA1 stud with mega power like Josh, get a Sagara. And if you're not, get a Cicada because it lands way over here and here and here. Or you could go for one of the straightest discs we tested today, the Disc Mania FD. Now, before you ask in the comments, because I'm sure some of you will, we did not get one of these Q-Line Premier FDs for this video. And there's a very good reason for that. It is an absolute beefcake. Some of the fastest throwing players in the world with the highest spin rates in the world are crushing this FD as hard as they can, and they're still seeing a huge fade.
Beef. That's so beef.
So there's no world in which it's going to fly straight for Josh, for me, or probably for any of you. What we do have instead are two options. Their stock C-Line FD and a swirly special edition S-Line FD. And we'll begin with the C-Line FD, which I have thrown previously, and it is kind of ridiculously overstable for me already. But of course, for Josh, he's able to hit it hard on just a slight hyzer and gets it to flip briefly before it gently fades back. And again, today in the world of fairway drivers, that's pretty straight. But C-Line plastic is usually pretty overstable. So again, grain of salt. That's how it flew for Josh today. The S-Line FD though is a thing of beauty, both here in the studio and out on the course. This shot here starts on just a tiny hyzer angle, flips up slowly, and just barely turns for one of the straightest shots all day. Another shot that perfectly illustrates this neutral stability is this one. Josh releases this shot on a little more hyzer, it flips up just a little bit, and while it's still holding a slight hyzer angle, it just keeps pushing forward rather than aggressively fading. And that is super impressive. That makes the S-Line FD the straightest disc we tested all day. And you might find it a bit surprising that I would declare the FD the winner, essentially, before we even threw this, the Bokeh. But honestly, I don't want to get your hopes up. The Bokeh is a great disc, it's just not the straightest disc. It's much more C-Line FD or Streak than it is S-Line FD. Today, in neutron plastic, our Bokeh gets a brief turn before a much more aggressive fade. And that's honestly more along the lines of what I expected. But we did throw this Bokeh on different days and in different plastics, and on those occasions we got slightly different results. The neutron Bokeh flew very similarly for Josh like a month or so ago, pushing straight before a subtle fade. But it also had a lot more fade for my arm speed in neutron plastic. Meanwhile, this prototype Proton Bokeh was a lot less overstable, so I'm sure you'll all, like me, be on the lookout for when MVP finally releases it in Proton in the future. But it didn't feel right to include those older Bokeh flights on different days and different conditions to the same standard that we were holding all these other discs today. So that leaves us with this, our finished comparison. The S-Line FD takes the cake as the straightest fairway driver today. And there were definitely some surprising results. That Total Eclipse Crave, the cicadas. Whew. However, I want to stress once again that these are just the results of one thrower, on one day, and with these specific discs. And as I'm sure you know, there are so many factors that contribute to how a disc will fly for you on any given day. And so I want you to keep that in mind when you watch disc golf content, whether it's here on YouTube or on any other platform. Anyone that tells you, including the manufacturer, that their disc is always going to do a certain thing or fly a certain way is to a certain extent misleading you. There are obviously expectations that you want to set. And after all, we sell our own disc now or make our own disc now. And so there are expectations that I want to set for how it was designed. But how it's going to fly for you is a truly individual experience. So try to find content creators that maybe have similar power to you and use that as a point of reference when you're trying to really understand a disc before you throw it for yourself. And I'm curious, have you thrown any of the discs that we tested today? How do they fly for you? Let us know in the comments below. And also comment below the straightest fairway driver in your bag. Remember, flight numbers don't matter. For Six-Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. The only way to begin is by beginning. Let's begin. Hi, Ava. You gonna lay down? Where were we? Now, as I mentioned before, Innova has tons and tons of different discs, and anyways, let's shift gears now to a few drivers from Innova, all flirting with the straight flight numbers. Anyways, let's shift gears to a few straight fairway drivers. Nope. Anyways, let's shift gears to a few drivers from Innova. Anyways, let's go ahead and shift gears to a few drivers from Innova that are all sort of flirting with straight fairway driver numbers. Anyways. So let's move on to my wife's most. Anyways, let's shift gears to a few another popular fairway driver in the, yep. And there's another shot that. If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or becoming a member. Your support makes this content possible.